Alright, let's do this. Treehouse of Horror 1 through Treehouse of Horror 7, the most classic of the Simpsons Halloween specials. Let's rank these individual segments. But we're not going to do a top 10 today, oh no. We're going to rank 20 of these things. Every single one of these are good, so ranking them is going to be a bloodbath. One unlucky segment won't even make the list. So let's get started. Here are my top 20 classic Treehouse of Horror segments. Well, this is an awkward place to start. Putting the Raven in 20th place feels like I'm flipping the bird at my high school English teacher. Yes, Mr. K, Edgar Allan Poe is cool. The Simpsons has convinced me. It is really awesome to see such a storyboard-driven segment on a show like The Simpsons. That the writers can take a step back, let James Earl Jones bring Poe's words to life, and let the animators do the rest. This dream sequence in particular is beautiful, and I love the frantic camera angles during the climax. In terms of visual direction, there aren't many treehouses that measure up. That being said, visuals can only carry a story so far. I love what the Simpsons writers bring to the show, all the snappy jokes and wordplay. I love how terrifying they make these episodes. Here they do their best relying on the visual jokes and Homer's characterization, but it's hard to compete with the jokes in the other stuff. Why settle for Edgar Allan Poe when you can have John Swartzwelder, right? Seriously though, despite only landing at number 20, The Raven is very cool, and if it got any viewers into Poe, then it was totally worth it. The Genesis Tub is a fun science fiction-y premise with admittedly not a ton of dramatic tension. It's one of those I enjoy on a strictly intellectual level. It's fascinating seeing how Lisa's microscopic universe evolves the way it does, and the Simpsons world interacting with it. It uses Bart and Lisa's sibling rivalry well, something we don't often get in these Halloween segments. Love this visual moment with the spaceship, too. Unfortunately, there's not much action to the story overall, just a lot of watching and observing. The stakes aren't particularly high, you know? We're not invested in this universe enough to care if Bart destroys it, only when Lisa gets stuck there. Don't get me wrong, this ending is excellent, especially with how pissed off Lisa gets at the situation. Bring me some shoes, nice ones. I think if they had 5 more minutes to tell the story, show off more of the little universe, it would be something special. But as is, the Genesis Tub is a smart little curiosity, a relaxing change of pace from their more action-packed Halloween fare. I think what this Monkey's Paw parody has going for it is its variety. That we get a trip to Morocco with the travel jokes therein, but also a diverse set of wishes. It reminds me of Time and Punishment, how they fit several standalone concepts into one segment. What if the Simpsons were rich and famous? What if aliens were able to take over? What about a world without lawyers? Wait, scratch that one. Unlike Time and Punishment, it's not really grounded by a character journey. It feels relatively more aimless, how they go from one situation to the next. It's not like the world peace wish is in reaction to the rich and famous one. The humor is a little dry as well. The best part by far is the meta-commentary about how the public is so darn sick of The Simpsons. Right here you might say Helen won't think of the children. So yeah, despite being kinda stuck in that season 3 down-to-earthiness, there's so many ideas contained in Lisa's nightmare that there's a little bit of something for everyone. Oof, probably gonna get a lot of angry letters about this ranking, but I've always been cooler on Bart Simpson's Dracula than most. It's a good segment, like all of these are. It just pushes my buttons sometimes. Its jokes are definitely its strongest point. They'd pack in a ton of references to the 1992 film and Dracula lore in general. Bart's Three Stooges thing is great, love the delivery of this line especially. And I'm always up for some funny burn stuff. But there are several gags that don't land, and a couple that make me audibly groan. Come on guys, this is a joke 10-year-olds would think of. The plot is slightly too ambitious for its own good, where none of the scenes ever have a chance to breathe, no time to build suspense with Bart. Honestly, I wish we could get to this dynamic quicker. This moment is perfect. The family dynamic is so darn funny here. More of this might have made the Marge ending feel more earned. I think if they had tightened up the story just a smidge, gave the whole family more focus as a whole, Bart Simpson's Dracula would easily be an elite Treehouse of Horror segment for me. As is, it's solid. This is simultaneously the most on-the-nose parody they've ever done and the most divergent. The Simpsons has done plenty of direct Twilight Zone parodies, but this is easily the most explicit, opening with a Rod Serling-esque monologue, utilizing key phrases and imagery from the original, even some of the plot elements. Bart's great as the monster. His destructiveness drives a lot of memorable jokes. Moe's prank call always gets a laugh. However, the second half is a huge swerve into a Homer-Bart relationship thing, barely even resembling a Halloween story at all. The idea is quite clever, turning the family relationship of the original on its head. There's a great payoff at the end, that this is Bart's nightmare after all. But I still feel kind of mixed about it. There's a part of me that watches these Halloween segments because I want to see Homer burn, not hug his son. They get a ton of points for creativity though. That voiceover guy at the beginning was right. I really didn't see this one coming. Surprised I'm ranking Clown Without Pity down here, since it has that amazing that's good, that's bad sequence in here. This one makes an outstanding first impression for sure. The Gremlins guy, Milhouse abuse, and then several consecutive minutes of Homer being tortured. What's not to love? Well, I'm not completely in love with the execution of the story, and that the middle portion is told through a series of vignettes. They just cut from one random moment to the next. What worked about the Twilight Zone original is how it built up the sense of paranoia, whereas this one feels more random and cartoony, more aimless in comparison. There's not a lot to the story. You gotta give them credit though for maximizing the comedy of the premise. Homer and Krusty really do make an amazing comedic duo. There are a lot of classic moments here. This is one of those cases of there not being much wrong with Clown Without Pity, it's just that the other segments shine a little brighter, are just a little more unique. Sorry, Krusty. I don't know if you guys have heard, but I love me some Burns and Smithers, so this is gonna be buoyed pretty hard by these two. There's so many memorable jokes between them here, just look at all this stuff. Young Frankenstein showed off the comedy potential of this concept, and if you don't think Burns and Smithers can pull it off, then I owe you a Coke. Unfortunately, I feel like all the Simpson family stuff holds it back just a little. Where it was season 3 and they had to justify the story through the lens of their dynamic, these scenes add very little to the goals of the story, aside from maybe the ending. Would have liked to see more of Homer in the robot's body. That's the real fun of a Robo-Frankenstein send-up. How come Frankenstein doesn't dance anymore? Still, like I said earlier, you can't really go wrong with a Burns and Smithers adventure, so if this is Homer's worst nightmare, I think he did pretty well for himself. Alright, let's just rip off this band-aid. I wish this segment were funnier. I respect the hell out of how ambitious it is, how revolutionary this was at the time, and what a 3D time capsule it is today. But on the humor side, yeah, not exactly a laugh riot. Good Tron joke though. However, the novelty alone carries Homer Cubed pretty far. There isn't a huge problem trading super dense jokes for something completely new. And to their credit, they pull off a very creepy and mysterious homage to the Twilight Zone. Actually being able to see this alternate dimension the whole time adds a new, dimension to the original story. And the ending is absolutely perfect. Feels like they went above and beyond, giving us a live action segment too. Ooh, erotic cakes. Homer Cubed is exactly the kind of story I want out of the Simpsons writers each year. Something we've never seen before, something truly challenging to the show. Huge respect that they achieved this back in 1995. Atmosphere and sarcasm. That's the magic combination for The Thing and I. You'd think they wouldn't go together, but somehow they make it work. This is one of those that has a strong build-up. They establish the mystery up front, build some intrigue, do some exploration, and then hit us with that backstory. The first half is so expertly told, but it kinda eats up all the time in the second half. They fill the story with screw the audience jokes and unexpected twists to keep the audience off balance. This is an extremely claustrophobic story that doesn't even leave the house, so this approach was very wise. It does lose a bit of comedic value, not being able to cut away somewhere else, but sometimes it's nice to have this intimate, closed-circle story keep the focus on the characters we're most invested in. Even if you don't care about the Simpsons' backstory, it definitely has one of the greatest Dr. Hibbert roles ever. And if you disagree, I suggest taking a hard look at yourself in the mirror. Bad Dream House is so darn creepy. I absolutely adore how different this thing feels, compared to every other Treehouse of Horror segment. They're not going for a murder spree like usual. This is all about that sense of dread, that slow preamble to bad things happening. We gotta give Alf Clausen a lot of credit. That music score perfectly evokes a sinister mood. Also gotta give special mention to the beautiful backgrounds and coloring. They did an incredible job making the house feel alive. I wouldn't say it's top tier in laughs or anything. This is still season 2 after all, but it's sneaky funny. There's a ton of great character humor throughout, like Homer trying to bargain his way through, Bart asking about his conscience, Marge's comment about knife fights. Actually, Marge in general just crushes this whole segment. There aren't many Halloween segments that are both conversational and terrifying, and somehow Bad Dream House pulls it off. Good stuff. This is a segment I sometimes forget about because it's such a slow starter. No offense to Bart and Lisa, but honestly, a lot of this preamble is pretty forgettable. Some hit or miss jokes, a strange cocktail of continuity and real-world references. On the other hand, the middle portion absolutely kills. The moment the first zombie pops out of the ground, it's a great time. Well, not for Flanders, but you know what I mean. We get plenty of amusing cutaway jokes with secondary characters, Homer gets more involved, we kill the zombie Flanders. It has a satisfying mix of Simpson family stuff and Greater Springfield as a whole. I always find myself wishing they could yada yada the beginning, or maybe have one extra minute, because this part always leaves me wanting more. The Simpsons really lends itself well to this kind of story. It's no wonder their 28 Days Later parody turned out well too. Sometimes you're just looking for an excuse to blow away your favorite characters, and Dial Z for Zombies gives it to us. It's as simple as that. King Homer isn't scary. I'm sorry, buddy, you're awesome, like King Kong was scary as a monster movie and everything, but this parody, this is driven entirely by its laughs. I would contend that this is one of the funniest Treehouse of Horrors ever. Look at all this vintage Mr. Burns stuff. Look at how destructive and pathetic Homer gets to be. Wow, look at the size of that platform. In a lot of ways, this feels like the most quintessential Season 4 thing ever, how they get that comedy parody exactly right. But there is a part of me that wishes it were more terrifying. A lot of the deaths are played strictly for laughs. The murder is on the breezy side of things. Still, the Marge and Homer relationship is so offbeat and sweet, it's not a huge deal. This joke is so hilarious and so in character for Homer, maybe we don't need a dizzying climb to the top of a building. Normally this is supposed to be Treehouse of Horror, not Treehouse of Jokes, but if the jokes are this consistently great, we'll make an exception. Terror at 5.5 feet feels like the jack-of-all-trades entry on this list, where it does everything pretty well, just nothing at a super elite level or anything. His jokes are solid all the way through, with very few duds. This Hans Moleman joke is an absolute classic. As a Twilight Zone adaptation, this story works well. Not a huge twist to the original, but they make it fit the series organically. I think its sense of tension is its strongest point. If you're going for this parody, you have to capture that feeling of uneasiness, that escalation as things get worse and worse. I like how the Simpsons version has this Groundskeeper Willie fake out in the middle. It keeps things from becoming too repetitive, serves as a mini reset, and adds some continuity to the story. This does indeed feel like a bus route, with the cast of characters evolving as we continue along. It reaches an exciting climax and manages to leave us with one final scare at the end. After the previous season's feel-good endings, this is a refreshing change in direction. Terror at 5.5 feet has everything I want in a Treehouse of Horror segment. I don't know if this is a hot take, but Nightmare Cafeteria is the creepiest Treehouse of Horror they've ever done. It's not crazy supernatural or anything, not filled with explicit gory violence, but man is it unsettling. I think it's a good example of the power of the uncanny, how they take such a typical situation and turn it into something sinister. This isn't a story about Skinner and Krabappel turning into zombies or being in a secret cult, they're just determined to fix a problem. Their betrayal of the students feels scarier because it could have happened in any Simpsons episode. Mrs. Krabappel, no! The knock against it is that it's not consistently funny. Like, it has that awesome Uter speech and a couple other memorable gags, and Homer's not even in this thing, -1 funny point. But I don't mind getting a few B-grade jokes if they're going to dial up the scary. Nightmare Cafeteria's sinister atmosphere more than makes up for it, ultimately serving up a disturbing story for all ages. It's weird that Hungry Are the Damned is in the first Treehouse of Horror. I mean, you can tell this is season 2 based on its animation and pacing, but in terms of story tone, this is much more in line with their season 5 and 6 stuff. They're playing this delightful game with the audience, making it abundantly clear that these aliens are going to eat the Simpsons. There's a level of self-awareness here, not necessarily that the Simpsons has done this before, but preying upon people remembering that old Twilight Zone or just being genre savvy in general. Interestingly, this one gets even funnier on the rewatch. It's so darn silly that all of this suspicious behavior is perfectly innocent. Also, I've got to give a shout out to the color design here. These dramatic greens, oranges, and reds throughout. It's extremely unusual for the show to punctuate moments like this. They even went for a dolly zoom. How many Treehouse stories have that? I think Hungry Are the Damned has a delightful mix of the early installment weirdness and the later season's sense of irony. I'm not surprised at all that after doing this adventure, the writers kept bringing Kang and Kodos back. Alright, I've talked about this one pretty recently, so no need to repeat the major stuff in detail. It's great because it's super quotable, full of political commentary, relevant, yada yada yada. Wouldn't it be crazy if we elected a monster? I think in the context of the other stuff, Citizen Kang stands out because of the satirical factor. A lot of Halloween segments focus on the Simpson family stuff, or else putting the town in danger, or whatever. Whereas this feels much more in line with what Futurama did later on. The crew finding out about a fantastical and dangerous situation, and then trying to warn the world about it. That sense of, sometimes you just can't win. There aren't many Treehouse of Horror stories that capture that societal dread, so for this fact alone, Citizen Kang is a clear standout in these classic years. Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace is certainly among the most faithful parodies The Simpsons has ever done. They're not exactly taking it in a radically new direction or anything. But that's okay, because this is a concept that's all about the execution. It lives and dies with the creativity of the dream sequences and the character designs. And they definitely scored a touchdown with this one. They walk the line of being referential while still giving it that Simpsons spin, adding that Groundskeeper Willie flavor to the mix. I had no idea that a bagpipe spider could be this terrifying. It's a great example of how to merge The Simpsons with a third-party concept, that they fit the story to this hilarious Skinner-Willie dynamic with the useless parents thrown in there. They don't have to cut away all over Springfield. The design of the story organically brings a lot of charming and witty characters. Also, Kirk is here. Everyone has something to do. Even Maggie comes in at the end to save the day. I think Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace has the best constructed story of all of these entries, incorporating plenty of quirky character moments and surreal situations while still telling a tight, well-paced story. It's not fair. This one shouldn't be on the list because bringing Lionel Hutz into a Treehouse of Horror is cheating. We'll allow it just this once. I think what elevates The Devil and Homer Simpson is its character exchanges, the snappy and conversational way the dialogue is delivered. This script oozes charisma. Casting Flanders as the Devil obviously works well in that surprising, ironic sense, but you know, he does have a cheerful and down-to-earth charisma that suits this role well. The Devil would totally try this folksy approach with people. Plus, you get the typical Homer and Flanders banter here, the fun reversal of Flanders getting the upper hand. There's definitely a danger of the courtroom drama being too dry, and for the most part, they sidestep this issue. It was a smart decision inserting a brief trip to hell in the middle, give us some surreal and wacky jokes before going back to the conversational humor again. There's a ton of great character posing too, a looseness to the animation that you don't often see. So many key poses worth pausing the episode for. I said the script oozes charisma, but a lot of the credit needs to go to the animators and the voice cast. The Devil in Homer Simpson is a masterclass in bringing characters to life and then sending them to hell. Man, Time and Punishment feels like they somehow crammed 4 or 5 different Treehouse of Horrors into one story without it feeling rushed and incoherent. The time travel plot gave the writers free rein to flex their creative muscles, to dream up whatever hilarious and terrifying future they want. It's extraordinarily well paced, how they'll stagger the more fleshed out experiences with short little pop-ins. It never feels like we're stuck in one place for too long, nor does it feel like we're bouncing around aimlessly. In addition, Homer's stuff with the dinosaurs works perfectly as a grounding point, where we can follow the progression of his emotions amidst these futures. This isn't the most three-dimensional Homer ever, but for a concept-driven story like this, that's okay. What you really want here are the big reactions, and nobody does that better than this guy. It understands how to push Homer's buttons, caters its experience to Homer's comedic strength. Pound for pound, Time and Punishment is one of the funniest things The Simpsons has ever done. A near flawless 7 minutes of television. The only reason it's not number 1 is because there's one other Homer performance I like just a little more. You've seen the rest of the countdown by now, and have heard me describe my favorite stuff about Treehouse of Horror segments. In my opinion, the Shinning is the greatest of all time because it contains all of the above. It's hilarious, terrifying, beautifully animated, full of wonderful performances, has a great Simpson family dynamic, and is an organic parody for the series. I mean, it even has Burns and Smithers stuff in there. That's just blatant pandering at this point. I'm personally really into character stuff in particular, and I feel like that's where the Shinning shines brightest. For Homer, it's pretty much a highlight package of everything that's great about him as a character. We all love to laugh at how dumb and gluttonous he is, how obsessed he is with TV, but we've seen his manic side of his personality too, his random streaks of violence. He can transform himself into something terrifying without losing his comedic edge. There's just enough sarcasm and schlockiness to the parody where it never feels too on the nose or pretentious. We get that perfect dichotomy of earnestly doing the atmosphere and horror of the original while constantly undermining it. It's so organic to the series, it almost feels like the parody wrote itself. But I think that's a testament to how well crafted this thing is, that it feels effortless, but is in reality full of incredibly smart decisions. The Shinning is not only the gold standard for Treehouse of Horror segments, but also Simpsons parodies in general. So that's where I landed for this top 20 list. Unfortunately, the sacrificial lamb this time ended up being Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores, which definitely isn't bad or anything, it's just everything else stood out a little more. Let me know in the comments how you would rank the classic Treehouse of Horror segments. Clearly when it comes to Halloween, I have a strong preference for Homer-centric stories, at least in these classic years. Which is odd, because most of my favorite modern ones belong to Bart and Lisa. Had originally planned to do a top 10 modern list too, until the LA Dodgers ruined my plans. Speaking of which, Treehouse of Horror 31 is premiering later this week, and I recommend checking it out. I was able to see it early, and it's definitely one of the strongest entries in years. Oh, and go watch Russian Doll. Have a spooky and social distanced Halloween. Thanks for watching.